This episode of Stage 9 is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek.fm at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Hello and welcome to episode 50 of Stage 9, Trek FM show about the people who make Star Trek. I'm Mike.
I'm John.
And today we're going to be taking a look at the musical careers of some of our favorite Star Trek actors, William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy.
Yes.
But before
Musical careers.
Musical careers, yes. But before we get started, we have a bit of a correction to make regarding something which we said, or which I said, a couple months ago in regards to Discovery. We were talking about how IMDb was listing Lee Rose as the director of Episode 5 of Star Trek Discovery, and we were talking about all of the great television shows which he directed. I'm ashamed to say that I made that assumption because Lee Rose is a woman.
Yes.
So I apologize for that. But
honest mistake on our part. That's,
Yeah.
It's not like I rushed in and corrected you. So,
No.
we both own this, and oops, sorry, our
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah, I should have known better. I should have checked. Lee, it can be used by all genders. I just
True.
always think of Lee Hutchison from, Earl Grey.
Earl Grey? Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I mean, how could you not?
I know
Lee.
he's like constantly, complaining about, movies on our private message forum. So
That's true. That's
he's,
true.
he's always in my phone. So still not an excuse. So.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Anyway, her name disappeared from IMDb and now it's back. So it looks like she actually is directing episode 5. So that's cool. Something to look forward to in the
Indeed.
not too distant future. Yeah. All right. So let's get into our feature for today. All right. Back in the day, Star Trek was really popular in the 60s. And a couple of Star Trek actors decided to take advantage of that popularity
Indeed.
and release some musical albums in which they sing or something along those
Sing.
lines.
Sing. Yes. Sing.
Okay. All right, yeah. Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner. Now, Nimoy, I think, got the jump on Shatner, having released a couple of albums. The first one being very Spock-centric. It was called...
Leonard Nimoy presents Mr. Spock's Music from Outer Space.
there you go.
A classic.
Yes. And then there's also Two Sides of Leonard Nimoy, which was the
Yes.
follow-up where side 1 was Leonard Nimoy as Spock and side 2 was Leonard Nimoy as himself.
Yes, yes. And he did, that was 67 and 68 were the
Yeah.
release years for that. And Shatner came close behind because Transformed Man was 68, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And Transformed Man was Shatner's take where he really kind of, I think, tried to distance himself from Star Trek as much as possible with that one and do his own thing, which is something that Nimoy did with his third album, The Way I Feel. And then he did another album after that called The Touch of Leonard Nimoy, which I think many people consider to be his best, and one which he was sort of like most involved with, and he wrote a number of songs himself on that album, including Maiden Wine, which he later performed in the episode Plato's Stepchildren.
Yes.
which I was completely unaware of, that was his own composition. So
Yeah. He certainly seems to have embraced. I mean, I think an important thing to keep in mind too, with well, why would they make record albums? Why would they try to sing? Is performers, from the school that Nimoy and Shatner came from, the majority of performers from that time period, they were still inheritors of the tradition of you did a little bit of everything. You did what felt right, whatever came to you is what you did, because it was work, and it was the way to keep your career out there and keep your name out there. And so you look at people shortly before them, like Dick Van Dyke. Dick Van Dyke, sing, song, dance, acting, comedy. You did a little bit of everything because you wanted to have that on your calling card. You wanted to be able to do that. So it sort of naturally falls that once their name gets out there, they're going to demonstrate some of their other skills.
Mm-hmm. And it was certainly some corporate synergy going on. I mean, with I forget who Shatner's label was, but Nimoy's label was Dot Records, which is owned by Paramount, and they obviously had the whole thing with the Star Trek going on and all that stuff, which is why you have things like the theme from Star Trek, which I had never heard. That sort of like
kind of a classic
rockin' theme, and then all sorts of Mr. Spock stuff going on in there. Mr. Spock on the cover and everything like that. It's pretty crazy,
Yeah.
And it's weird because you think like, well, so does that take place in Star Trek continuity?
Oh, stop it! Don't you dare!
You
Don't you dare! I think the takeaway for it, especially with the parts where he embraces Spock, not just that whole album, but like the two sides of and everything, is it really reinforces the fact that Spock was Nimoy's character.
Mm-hmm.
Like so much of what made Spock came from him. That's very obvious. Because here he is on these outside projects, and it's there's not that feel of getting a side product that comes out where you're like they're just taking advantage of a knockoff of the title. Like he's still the character. This is still coming from him and not anywhere else.
Yeah, and I do think that he probably wanted to get away from that. He probably realized that was his entry into this, kind of world. But, I mean, the fact that, the second album is two sides of Leonard Nimoy, and the first one is, that Spock thing, and the second one he's like, I want to do my own thing, and then he just, like, gets rid of Spock from here on out. I think he kind of realized, what the game was, and that this was the only way he was going to get his foot in the door. But once he was in there, he could kind of get the freedom to do his own thing,
Sure. And the thing is, it's the albums are successful enough. I mean, again, this is one of the things, I wasn't alive at the time, but I was there for the tail end of LPs as they were getting replaced by CDs. And, you needed to have a certain amount of success. It wasn't today's landscape where you could throw something together and put it on YouTube or any other medium where it's a lot cheaper now to produce these things. For them to do a record pressing, and those first couple albums sold well enough that he could continue doing it. So somebody liked what he was doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting with that first album because, for one thing, I mean, something which is true for, like all of his albums, I think, like they're really short, 11 songs, 24 minutes. Like that's pretty damn short. It's crazy.
It's high quality. He was making sacrifices for high quality, because the shorter the album was, the higher quality that the pressing would be.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Totally not true, of course, but it works for me.
Okay. It's true for Laserdiscs, but yeah. Anyway, I guess these were not on Laserdiscs, even though they were the same size.
No, records and Laserdiscs looked very similar, but different technology.
Okay, all right.
Trust me.
But it is interesting that there were a lot of non-vocal tracks on this thing, which I'm assuming he probably didn't have much to do with at all. That'd be my guess.
I don't think that he composed the theme to Star Trek,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think
and he
that
probably
he composed.
didn't arrange that or perform it either, right?
Yeah, I'm willing to bet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to bet, and I believe is it this album or is it one of the later albums where the theme to Mission Impossible was on there?
It's this album, which I was like, that's weird, because he would be on Mission Impossible, but not for like another 3 years. when this
Perhaps
thing
he
came
was
out.
dropping a hint to a producer.
That's possible. I think probably the more likely scenario is that, as we've discussed many times, Star Trek and Mission Impossible were sister shows on the same network from the same studio and everything. And the fact that they owned both and there was that natural crossover appeal, I think they were like, we could stick this on there. That would add a couple minutes.
Yeah,
that would work, right?
No, yeah, right. Now, see, the thing that's very interesting is my first exposure to either one of them singing was the Golden Throats albums that were released, which were compilations of they pulled the worst moments that they could, and the whole point of it was to sort of have a good chuckle at these stars. They had I remember one of the tracks was Sebastian Cabot doing he was doing like a Dylan song. Not Mr. Tambourine Man as Shatner so famously did, but I mean, and Andy Griffith was on the album and it was one of those things where you would listen to it and you couldn't believe what you were hearing. And so basically Shatner's album, The Transformed Man, became something of a holy grail item for me. It was a lot harder to get a hold of stuff. And I remember the shop I was in. It was a record store in College Park, Maryland. And I saw a CD copy of The Transformed Man, and I lit up. I couldn't believe I had found it. Now, this store was known for its ability to acquire rarities and hard-to-find things. It had a back room that you needed like a special code phrase to get the quote-unquote imports. Nothing dirty, but like the stuff that wasn't technically released. And I think that the store is closed and the statute of limitations is gone. So, and I don't even remember the name of the store, so whatever. But I remember finding The Transformed Man, and that was, wow. I mean, Nimoy, I think this speaks a lot to sort of the type of esteem Nimoy was held in versus the type of esteem that Shatner was held in for a time, where people knew about Ballad of Bilbo Baggins or If I Had a Hammer, or, these different songs where it was kind of like, haha, you didn't quite hit that note there, Leonard. But Shatner, this album was open to derision. Like it was, how every so often there's a movie like The Room or a Neil Breen movie where you put it on for your friends because you're like, no, you got to see this. The Transformed Man was that. Once I got my hands on it, I was going around to friends' houses and saying like, no, you got to listen to this, and putting it on, and we would have a great chuckle at it. It was the weirdest concept album that I'd ever listened to. Like, period, full stop, end of sentence. It was so bizarre what he was trying to do with this album. But like now that I'm older, I look at it and it's still not a favorite, but I look at it and I'm like, wow, that took real guts to do something like this, to purposely pair up, a dramatic acting piece with a song that you felt, it put the capper on it. And the whole theme of the thing was how a person can transform, through these pieces and tracking the journey. For a concept album, that's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, he was definitely trying for something more. He wasn't, doing that thing which I think probably a lot of people in his position would do, which is say, like, here's some hit songs, I'm going to perform them and release them because, I don't know. Lots of times I wonder, like, what the reasoning behind this is. I wonder if it's, because they want their ego stroked, or I wonder if it's because music is their passion and now they have an outlet, which, most people wouldn't have, because they can sort of like cash in on their celebrity in order to get these things out, And, with Shatner's album, it really is sort of like, who knows exactly what the reasoning behind him wanting to do an album in the first place was, but he does that thing which Shatner does on numerous occasions where people are like, hey, Shatner, you want to do this thing? It would be crazy and cool. And he's like, yeah, I would do this thing. I do want to do this thing. And they're like, great. So let's just do it, right? And he's like, well, I have an idea, you know? And then I think everyone involved is kind of like, I thought we were, but I thought it was just going to be like a thing where you come in and do some songs and then leave. And he's like, no, I have an idea. And the thing about Shatner's ideas is lots of times they don't work, but you got to give him an A for effort, you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh, he doesn't do anything halfway.
No.
And I mean, this album is a shining example of that.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess I had kind of, I guess my first introduction to Transformed Man was kind of like I would have been one of the people who you were showing it to, you know? I had a friend who was a huge Shatner fan, and we kind of bonded over Shatner, but he was a little bit older than me and, you know, sort of like experienced all of Shatner before I did, you know, and kind of like taught me in the ways of Shatner. And
making him sound like a Shatner master. Is that
yeah,
like a
he was
Jedi
basically
master?
what it was.
Okay.
You know, he was like the Yoda of Shatner, or of Shatnerism, or whatever. And he, you know, told me about like, oh yeah, he had this singing career or whatever. And you know, you could find, you know, like I think he had a few, you know, tracks, like individual tracks. You know, I think he had Mr. Tambourine Man, and he had Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and he had, you know, his performance of Rocket Man, you know,
yes.
at that science fiction awards show. And, you know, you'd hear these things, and there was the whole, you know, sort of like chuckle factor, you know, that you're talking about, where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe that he's doing this. But at the same time, like I always got the impression that we weren't laughing at him so much as we were laughing with him. You know,
I don't think that we were laughing with him at first, but I think that one of Shatner's greatest skills is to find out that people are laughing at him and then getting in on the joke, like in a sense, getting ahead of it. Not ahead of it, because like he jumps on and he rides the wave and he figures out how to turn it to his advantage.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that all culminates obviously with, you know, Has Been, which is because I remember having the good fortune of seeing him perform his you know, his one man show, and him talking about getting to that point when you know, so they approached him and they said, you want to do an album? And he was nervous, and he said specifically, he said, everybody laughed at me. I don't want them to laugh at me again. How do I keep them from laughing at me? And apparently it was Ben Folds that said, just tell them the truth. Yeah. And it's like that produces something miraculous in a sense. Like Has Been is a terrific album, top to bottom.
Yeah.
And it's and I think that really speaks to how important it is to have a producer who knows how to speak to and speak the language of the artist in question, you know, to bring out the best in them.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right about Has Been. I mean, you know, I remember that album came out, you know, while I was working with you know, that friend that I was talking about, and you know, as soon as it dropped, you know, we listened to it and we were like, oh my God, this is amazing. You know, it's this isn't funny or anything like that. I mean, it is funny, you know, but we're not laughing at Shatner anymore. Now, you know, this is definitely something where he's made, you know, a piece of music which holds up there with, you know, the best music around. So, I mean, you look at his cover of Common People, you know, as well as, you know, a lot of his more personal songs where he's talking about, you know, his relationship with his family and stuff like that, you know, and not to mention the collaborators that he gets involved. I mean, Ben Folds is amazing, you know, but they've also got, you know, Henry Rollins on there doing an amazing song, you know, called I Can't Get Behind That. And, you know, Amy Mann is on that album and everything. It's pretty great. But yeah, it's interesting how he has really sort of transformed his career, you know, where...
Well, I mean, I think the first moment where he sort of starts taking control of it is in the 90s when Futurama gives him the opportunity to poke fun at himself about it. With,
Yeah.
You know, that's that show, you know, where no fan has gone before. You know, how did he do a spoken word performance of a rap song? He found a way.
Yeah, there was that, and there was also, I think maybe this, I don't know if this was a couple years before or a couple years after, but, you know, certainly, I think it had to have been a couple years before. It was Free Enterprise, you know, in which
Oh, that's right.
he does
You're right. Yeah.
the musical version of Julius Caesar, and he raps, you know, No
Yeah.
Tears for Caesar, which is amazing. And
True.
from what I've read and everything, that's what led to him doing the spoken word commercials for Priceline, which was like his original, you know, his original commercials for Priceline were those spoken word things. And then
That's right.
and then post that, you know, there's also, you know, Miss Congeniality, where he does, you know, Miss United States, you know, and everything. And I mean, he was kind of like on a roll from that point, you know, forward. I mean, he's really, really good at what he does, you know, the spoken word thing. And, you know, a lot of people will criticize him for that and say, like, he can't sing. And he's the first, I mean, he says it on his albums, you know, he can't sing, you know, but he's not trying to. He's doing his own
Right.
thing, you know?
Right.
And it works really, really well. I think that the albums that he's done since Has Been haven't been quite as good, but I mean,
agree.
Has Been is certainly his masterpiece, and that's an album which I can turn on and listen to unironically, you know, at any given point, and it totally works. Whereas with Nimoy, you look at, you know, kind of like the stuff that he did after he was sort of like breaking away, and yeah, it was in like rapid succession, and he stopped after a while, but I don't know. He's not a very good singer, I think,
That
for
is
one
true.
thing. And you know, there are certainly points where he's, you know, trying to say something and, you know, does a good job of saying it. I mean, like even on that first album, there's the whole thing about, you know, the last song where it's basically talking, A Visit to a Sad Planet is the name of it.
Yeah.
Where he's basically talking about how we're destroying Earth and how we should probably knock that off. And, you know, I mean, that's really cool. But to me, it doesn't reach the heights of Shatner. And I think, you know, maybe a big part of that has to do with Ben Folds being in Shatner's corner. You know?
Well, I think that Nimoy did it for a while and then got tired. I think that probably the fact that people made fun of him for it is what kept Shatner, like kept that itch alive for him. Mm-hmm. Because Shatner very much strikes me as the type of guy where if you come at him, he wants to prove you wrong, like real bad.
Yeah.
And, so, I can respect that. I will say another memory that just floated up to the top was Nimoy's version of If I Had a Hammer. That did become legendary among me and my friends because of the spoken word part at the end where he says, well, I have a hammer. And the way he says it is, I have a hammer. And, he later says, it's the hammer of justice. And so my buddy Mike got a hammer and hung it up on his wall. And he said, that's the hammer of justice. You yokels, piss me off. I'm going to hit you with it. And it just became the hammer of justice. So
that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I was not really too familiar with Nimoy's musical work up until listening to the stuff for this show. The only thing that I really knew of was the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins.
Oh yeah,
which I was a projectionist at a movie theater back when the Lord of the Rings movies came out. And for the first movie, like this was back before you had all the pre-show with all the whatever and the music, and we had a midnight show of that first Lord of the Rings movie, and that movie's 3 hours long and everything like that. So it's getting out at like 3 o'clock in the morning, and of course you've got people who are sticking around for the credits, watching every last credit. And meanwhile, all of us are just like, it's time to go home, everybody. Let's leave. How about we leave, And as like people were like in the theater, we decided to play the Ballad of Bilbo Baggins, as they were exiting at 3:30 in the morning.
Get them to get out a little quicker.
Oh, they were digging it though. They were dancing and everything. I don't know if anyone knew that it was Leonard Nimoy who was singing, but it was.
Yeah. Yes, it certainly was.
But for like Shatner, Transformed Man, yeah, I mean, you're right that it was impossible to find, and it took me forever to get a copy, and I finally got it when they re-released it. I think after Has Been was a success, then they re-released it. But I did have a copy which I couldn't actually listen to a few years earlier because I was at a convention here in Chicago, and Creation does those auctions, where they're like, here's a bunch of photos which are signed by cast members, and the suggested retail price for this is $5,000. We'll start the bidding at $10, and then they sell it for like $100, and they're like, what a steal. And then like you go on eBay and look at how much it's worth, and it's worth like $50.
I got roped in for something like that at Star Wars Celebration 3. Because I didn't want to buy the re-releases of the soundtracks. I was like, no, you guys are just trying to make me pay the money. And they're like, yes, but you can get this LP of the Episode 1 soundtrack, which was blah 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 blah. I was like, oh, that's awesome. We could go on. Yeah, we'll sell this on eBay. We got home and we looked it up on eBay, and my friend Mike's like, it's like $10. I was like,
yep.
Damn it.
Yeah, I mean, I usually just like sit there and laugh at these things, but they had all the stuff like out on the table before, at the start of the show, like as you were coming in, like stay till the end and bid on these items. And one of the things that they had was an LP of Transformed Man.
Do you still have it?
Yeah, I have it hanging on my wall right there in my dining room.
Dude, you have to buy a record player. You got to get the full feel of it, the experience of listening to the LP. Transport yourself back. Put wood paneling up on your walls. Get the full acoustic feel.
Maybe. I mean, I've sort of become a fan of like I'm like happy that LPs are coming back, especially like that are like soundtracks for movies, because it looks like Laserdisc cover art. Like I've got Kill Bill Volume 1 and Volume 2 on LP. I really wanted to get that Clueless one with the yellow plaid disc and everything. Mm-hmm. So maybe I will get a record player just so that I can listen to Transform Man.
As somebody who went through like the forced format switch, to get to CDs and everything and get to accept it and get to, and getting rid of all of our LPs and everything, to have LPs making a comeback is, I will not lie, kind of ticks me off a little bit, because it's, I know it's the grain and you have to get the good needle and everything like that. It's like, no, I just want to play it. Okay. That's all I care about. I just want to play it.
It's total hipster BS, if you ask me. It's the same thing, or a very, very similar thing to, watching a movie on film versus digital and everything like that. Mm-hmm. There's its place and there's its thing, and it sounds like a whatever, and 35 millimeter looks like a whatever. But there's a lot of times where it does not make any sense. And 99.999% of the people who say that they can hear a difference in terms of the actual audio quality, I'm not talking about like all the pops and the hisses and everything, but the actual audio quality, the fidelity, they're lying.
It's mass hypnosis. You're going with mass hypnosis?
It's not mass hypnosis. It's people wanting to be cool and, pretending that there's a difference just so that they can be one of the cool kids.
I'll tell you the difference that I hear, the difference that I've always loved. And the CD that finally really broke the back of everything for me was actually the Star Trek 6 soundtrack. By Cliff Idleman, because that was the first disc I owned that was triple digital, digitally recorded, digitally mastered, digitally, transferred, right? And it was so crystal clear. I get the audio range thing and that whole argument. I agree with you. The human ear can hear blah, blah, blah. But to have music that doesn't have the pops and scratches of LPs used to drive us all crazy. Yeah. We hated it. And we got the same line back then where it's like, well, you have to replace your needle with this special $100 needle. And I was like, I don't have $100 laying around to buy a new needle. Yeah. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's just, so. Yeah.
Anyway, yes. But I do have it hanging on my wall over there. It's a prized possession for sure.
It should
amazing.
be.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah.
I wonder what would happen if you met Mr. Shatner and asked him to sign it. If he would sign it or if he'd beat you with it.
I'm sure he would sign it as long as you gave him $75.
That's true.
Anyway, well, it's been fun talking about Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner and their musical careers today, but that's not all we're talking about here on Trek FM this week. So here's a look at what you may have missed elsewhere on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, The Ready Room.
It's interesting how they're doing the casting, but I think it would be nice to actually have two ships involved, because one thing that I feel Star Trek has long suffered from, even with Deep Space Nine, which did try to break out of it a bit, is that small world syndrome.
Standard Orbit.
And Jim Carrey, as they're fighting, he's like singing along. He's like, brah, brah. As he's fighting, he's singing along as he's fighting Matthew Broderick. And man, it's just so good. Like, to me, that's like, when I think of Star Trek and pop culture, like, that is the one, that's the first scene that I think of in the Cable Guy there.
The Orb.
This is another thing that we're seeing all over the world, but this whole idea that just because something is hard, we should avoid it. But that is absolutely untrue. I mean, just look at your life, look at my life, I look at anybody's life, and the things where people have learned the most have been the hard things.
To the journey!
Wait, you're saying it's like matter and antimatter when they interact? They
it's like costume
annihilate
or
each other.
non-costume.
So costumes and non-costumes annihilate each other.
Yes.
In Voyager.
That is how the universe is going to ultimately be destroyed, due to the interaction of naked people and people wearing clothes.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out these shows and discover what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're an Apple user, go to Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, then you can listen to us on your iPhone or iPad or Apple TV, which is kind of weird, but I've done it before. Or just on your desktop iTunes app, you can get the latest episodes as soon as they're published. That way, if you subscribe. If you don't subscribe, then you're going to have to wait a little while for it to come up in iTunes. So subscribe, get it as soon as it's released, hot off the presses. And also, while you're there, leave us a star rating and a written review. We'd really appreciate that. But if you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find us on Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, and most of other third-party apps. And you can also stream and download the MP3 from our website or download the RSS link as well. If you want to contact us, you can find us on the Babel Conference, which is our listener forum on Facebook. Just type Babel, that's Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and we'll come right up. Or you can send us an email. If you go to trek.fm/contact, you can find Stage 9 on the drop-down menu or whatever it is, and you can send us a message, and we'll respond to you on the air if you'd like. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. John, where can people find you on the internet?
Look for Kessel Junkie. He's out there roaming the streets, the internet streets, alone, afraid. Help him out. You can also find me co-hosting Words with Nerds with my pal Craig, which is just weekly zaniness. You can find me co-hosting Aggressive Negotiations with Matt Rushing over on the Nerd Party Network. And you can find me on the Nerd Party Network co-hosting Great Shot Kid, which is like this show, but for Star Wars people, which I co-host with Mike Schindler. Mike?
Yes, you do. You can find me there. You can also find me on TalkFilmSociety.com doing a show called Soderbergh 2828, where we look at all of Steven Soderbergh's movies. And you can find me on my website, CommentaryTrackStars.com, doing Commentary Track Stars, where we do audio commentaries and various other weird things. And you can find me on Twitter at Mumbles3K. We'd like to thank our associate producers today, Chris Steftenagel and Jeff Sutter.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for helping us out. If you want to be like Chris and Jeff, head on over to Patreon, and you can become a patron of the network. visit patreon.com/trekfm. That's patreon.com/trekfm to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. Just head on over there. We really appreciate any support you can give us because it's not cheap podcasting. We hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/trekfm. All right. Well, I think that pretty much does it for Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner and their vocal cords today. But next week, we will be back to take a look at 3 movies by cinematographers from the modern Star Trek era, with Dan Mendel's Domino, Stephen F. Wyndon's Furious 7, and Guillermo Navarro's From Dusk Till Dawn.